Will, al-mashi'ah, or al-irada, two names for the same attribute. An-Nasafi said, وَالْإِرَادَةُ صِفَةٌ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى أَزَلِيَّةٌ قَائِمَةٌ بِذَاتِهِ تَعَالَى. Will is an attribute of Allah, the Exalted, beginningless, confirmed for His self, exalted is He. Qa'imatun bidhatihi, confirmed for His self, that means existing by His self. Existing by His self, because confirmed here means existing. The will of Allah is His eternal, everlasting attribute by which He specifies the various possibilities in some way or another. He makes the various possibilities one way or another way by His will. So His will is His specifying, such as existing at one time or place or another, now or later or in the future. He states, في أي صورة ما شاء ركبك. In any such form He willed, He constructed you. Yani He will create you in any form that He wills, in any structure, or He will give you any appearance. في أي صورة. He will give you any image, any appearance that He wills. Anything related to this attribute is murad, willed or meant. And His power is equally related to those matters. The power of Allah is related to whatever His will is related. But when you consider their relation to power, you call them maqdur. And when you consider their relation to will, you call them murad. So maqdur is subject or powered, and murad is willed or meant. However, when considering them related to power, they are called maqdur, controlled or powered. Allah said, فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. Fa'al, frequent doer of whatever He wills. Frequent because fa'al is an amplified form of fa'il, doer. The intellectual argument for this attribute is that had He not been ascribed with it, nothing would exist. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ. His will is His choice. Al-ikhtiyar. So al-ikhtiyar is His attribute. He has more than 13 attributes. Some of those attributes and meaning go back to the 13 though. Like choice goes back to His attribute of will. That's why it's under this chapter. He is not forced to do whatever He does, and He is not a doer by His self or by nature, as the philosophers said. Now remember, when I first heard this word choice, I heard Sheikh Samir, and maybe Hajiyad was translating for him at the time. And he said choice. And I was like, choice? Nah, that doesn't work. So I tried to catch Sheikh Samir. I wanted to tell him, no, you can't say choice. He never even answered me. It's like he knew what I wanted. MashaAllah. So He is not a doer by His self. And He is not a doer by nature, as the philosophers said. They mean that He does not have a will. That's what they mean by these statements. He is a doer by Himself. That means He doesn't have a will. Or He is a doer by nature. That means He doesn't have a will. So they mean that He does not have a will. So He does not do anything by any choice. He rather creates by His self, as the Mu'tazila said. They meant that the creation occurs from Allah without Allah willing it. Like the sun with its rays. From there, they claim that the world is eternal and at the same time is the result of something other than itself. So the philosophers believe in two types of eternity or eternality. They believe in, and these are my words here to express what they claim. They believe in an original eternality or a fundamental one. This is the eternality that we mean, which is the only one, the being eternal without a beginning, without being affected, without being yani existing, without being the trace of someone else's power. That's what we mean when we say eternal. Existing without being the trace of someone else's power. So they say that's a thing. They say there's another thing too. And we say, no, there's no other thing. They say, yeah, there is. There is being eternal um, subordinately. There's a subordinate eternality to them, which is what we just mentioned here. They believe that he creates by himself. They meant that creations occur from Allah without Allah willing it, like the sun with its rays. So it's like they're saying, imagine if God were the sun and the creation were the sun rays. So if the sun were eternal, then his rays would be eternal, even though the rays come forth from the sun. It's like they're saying that sun would have always been shining in eternity. And so the sun is eternal and its rays with it are eternal too. So that's how they see the creator and the creations. From there, they say he doesn't have a will. So to them, he's like the sun with its rays. Allah said in his book, وَرَبُّكَ يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَخْتَارُ. Your Lord creates what he wills and he chooses. He advances things and delays them as he chooses. The Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, أنت المقدم وأنت المؤخر وأنت على كل شيء قدير. O Allah, you are Al-Muqaddim, who advances whatever he will, and you are Al-Mu'akhir, who delays whatever he will, and you are over everything powerful. Another evidence is the saying of Allah, وَفِي الْأَرْضِ قِطَعٌ مُتَجَاوِرَاتٌ وَجَنَّاتٌ مِّنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَزَرْعٌ وَنَخِيلٌ صِنْوَانٌ وَغَيْرُ صِنْوَانٍ يُسْقَى بِمَاءٍ واحد ونفضل بعضها على بعض في الأكل. In the earth are plots of land that border each other, and gardens of grapes, and cultivation, and palm trees, some with two offshoots from one trunk, and some without, means like twin palm tree, one base, and then two trees shoot out from it, and some without. All are irrigated by the same water, and we make some of their fruits more preferable than others. So this ayah is a proof for God's choice, which is his will. Here, his doings differed while the circumstances were the same, or although the circumstances were the same. I want to put that. Although the circumstances, yani despite that, the circumstances were the same. For a tree, such as an apple tree, is irrigated by some water. However, its fruits have different flavors. Some are sweet and some are sour. Had Allah been a doer by nature and not will, his doings would not differ when the circumstances are the same. The fact that the flavors differ while its nutrients are the same proves that the Creator acts by choice, not nature. How do sometimes twins come out looking the same, and sometimes they come out looking different? Or two people, the same man and woman, they have children, the children come out looking different. And like that, the trees themselves, they come out different. Each one has its own branches. The one tree has many fruits. Each fruit has its own flavor. He also said in his glorious book, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. That's in two places. We have it here, Surah Al-Takwir. Where else is that? Surah Al... Is it Ad-Dahr? Or... No, it's not Qiyamah. Or Al-Muddathir. I think it's Al-Muddathir. You do not will except that Allah wills. Yani, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ. You don't will إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ Allah. Unless Allah wills. This verse contains an important fundamental, which is the very wording of the hadith of Abu Dawood. When the Prophet ﷺ taught one of his daughters to say, مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ كَانَ وَمَا لَمْ يَشَأْ لَمْ يَكُنْ. Whatever Allah willed to be shall be, and whatever Allah did not will to be shall not be. And don't forget, you have all these proofs in here in this outstanding reference. So you have so many proofs you can memorize. It also proves this ayah. It also proves that the slaves have a will, albeit limited, and thus they are not coerced. The slaves have a will because وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ. You do not will is a denial that the slaves choose. But illa, except, actually excludes something from that denial, i.e., an exception after a negation is a confirmation. Therefore, this verse confirms that you indeed will. You have a will. However, the confirmation is not absolute. Yani, you can't create anything. It is restricted to that Allah wills. We are certain that the slaves have a choice that drives them to act without being forced or coerced. This is the creed of Ahlus Sunnah, that we have will, including the animals and the genies and the angels. Anyone who intends to move his hand, for example, finds within himself a choice to do the deed or refrain from it. This is not the case of the compelled one. He would not be able to move, even if he chose to. The Jabriyah believe in Jabr, compulsion, that the creation has no choice, which implies not being accountable for their deeds. That's blasphemy. Denying the choice of the slaves is blasphemy because it's against the definitive observed evidence, because we observe that. And also it's a denial of accountability, and that's blasphemy too. The Mu'tazila called Ahlus Sunnah the Jabriya, and the Mujbira, same thing, Jabriya, Mujbira, for believing that Allah creates the deeds of the slaves. So basically, we have three groups here in this topic. You have the people who believe that the slaves create their own deeds. So they are all the way at one extreme. So they don't believe that God creates their deeds because they believe they create their own deeds. They say God only created their bodies. Then you have on the other end, some people, they believe that God creates all their deeds, but they have an extremist view to the extent that they don't believe they have a choice to do anything. So these are two opposites. And then you have the middle, that's us, which is that we believe that God creates our deeds. We believe that God creates our deeds, but we have a choice. One group saying, our choice is our power to create. We say that's too far. We have a choice, but it's not a power to create. And the other group says, God creates what we do, so we don't choose anything. We say that's too far too. He does create what we do, and we still choose. So God creates what we do and still enables us to choose. That's our belief. So then, if we're in the middle, then that means those two extremist groups, which way, what are they going to call us? Each one's going to call us the other side, the polar opposite side. We're in the middle. So the ones who believe that they create their own deeds, just for the fact that we confirm that God creates our deeds, then they're going to say we are the mujbira, the people who believe in coercion. And the people who believe that they don't have any choice whatsoever, because God creates their deeds, then they're going to accuse us of being Mu'tazila. So the Mu'tazila called Ahlus Sunnah the Jabriya and the Mujbira for believing that Allah creates the deeds of the slaves. Al-Ash'ari says that this is a mistake on their part. There is nothing in our school that necessitates that name, that we should deserve to be called Jabriya, nor do we confess to anything of the sort. Unlike them, who admit blasphemy, they say they created their own deeds, those Mu'tazila. Yani, Al-Ash'ari is saying, we don't believe anything that dictates that we should be called Jabriya. And so, Yani, when we say we don't believe, it means we don't even give any implication about that you can hold against us. And we don't say anything of the sort. Maybe it's more clear if I reverse that. We don't say anything of the sort, and we don't even imply it so that we deserve this name of Jabriya. Unlike them, those Mu'tazila, they confess. Yani, they're not going to say it's blasphemy, but they say they created their own deeds. They come out and say it. We do not say that Allah forced anyone to do anything that He ordered them to do. We don't say that Allah forced anyone to do anything that He ordered them to do, nor did He compel anyone to refrain from what He forbade them. As for the creation of health or imperfections of the bodies, there's no argument about it. Yani, meaning, as for health and imperfections of the bodies, there's no argument about that from all the groups. None of them are saying Allah didn't create it. So where are they differing? They're differing about the bodies themselves versus the actions that we do. No, we don't say, meaning that Allah forced us or compelled us, because He gave us a choice. That's why. Because so choice by definition means we're not forced. So every time one of us gets up to perform his prayer, every time one of you, for example, you put your headscarf on before you go out of the house, that's your own choice. That's why you should take advantage, make the intention, so you get the reward for that. But it's Allah's mercy that He guided you. But let me see if I'm going to get ahead of myself. So maybe it's going to come, but I'll say right. There is an amount of compulsion, though. There is an amount of compulsion because Allah is the creator, and no one makes Him create anything. Yani anything that did come into existence and came into existence according to His will, absolutely. Yani each one of us, for example, we have something. You have a sickness. You have a problem. You have whatever. So if that was something that you could choose, yani look, let me say it this way. Every single person, for example, has a shape, has a color, has a place, has a circumstance, etc. So all these things, we didn't create them. I'm not in Russia right now, and I can't make myself be there. And any attributes that I have, I can't just change them by my will, for example. So all of that is by the creating of Allah. I didn't make myself be as I am. If Allah willed, I could have been born with defect. I could be missing fingers or something like that. So this body that I have, this place that I have, this situation that I have, all of that is by the creating of Allah. And likewise, the actions that I do, the actions that I do are no different from the body that I have in being created by God. In other words, we can say Allah has two types of creations. He has a type of creation that has a will and a type of creation that doesn't have a will. He created both of those. He created both types. He created creations that have wills and creations that don't have wills. Those creations that don't have wills, they're just like the creations that have wills in being created. In being created, they're alike. But in having wills, they're different. And the ones that have wills, their wills are created. So there is a type of force. There is an amount of forcing. But that forcing is not apparent. How it's not apparent? Because what appears that we can choose to do what we want to do. That's what appears to us. So this was apparent. It was apparent that I can just now stop my lesson and eat right now, for example, if I wanted to. So so the compulsion there, that doesn't appear. So it doesn't count. Doesn't count against the accountability. Doesn't count against the accountability. The accountability is still confirmed. But if you have a question, feel free. So let me repeat the statement here. We do not say that Allah forced anyone to do anything that He ordered them to do, nor to compel anyone to refrain from what He forbade them. Yes. One proof that we have choice is the fact that Allah revealed laws in the first place. Allah revealed laws of halal and haram. Those is one law for all of us. So that one law, why is there? Because each one of us is acting according to our own volition. So there's one thing that Allah made us obligated to resort to refer back to, despite our choice to do many things, which is that religious law. Al-Ash'ari said that the reality of the Mu'tazili schools and the implications of their sayings is that they coerce Allah. They claim that they do in the dominion of Allah what He does not accept, because they believe they create their own deeds even if God didn't create. Yani they're saying God didn't create my deeds, I create my deeds. So they believe that they do in God's dominion what God doesn't accept. They say God doesn't create evil. If I do evil, I created the evil. So they believe that they do in God's dominion what God does not accept. So the reality of their claims is that they coerce God. That's what Al-Ash'ari is saying. According to their own way, that is. Thus, according to that, things occur that Allah does not accept, and what He does not will to take place. And what He willed does not take place. Because they believe that Allah willed for everyone to be a believer, but it didn't happen. So they believe that what God willed doesn't always happen. Thus, according to that, things occur that Allah does not accept, and what He willed does not take place. This is exactly this exactly is the linguistic. This is exactly what is linguistically understood from ijbar, compulsion. They say, if Allah eternally knew and willed for the slave to do the deed, and He created the slave and the deed, if the doing of the slave were subject to destiny, then there is no way for the slave to escape the will of Allah. So he is forced, compelled to blaspheme, and prevented from belief by a will most decisive and irrevocable. How would the deed then be attributed to him, to the slave? Do you not see that the heartbeat and shivering are not counted as deeds of the slave because he cannot resist them? Look at this argument here. So this is Mu'tazili argument. I'll repeat it. Mu'tazila, the scholars said about them, afhalul firaq. Afhalul firaq. That means the studliest of the sects. You know, it's a stud. It's like saying tough guys. Subhanallah, some of their arguments have high potential for confusion. Take this one here. Imagine a person doesn't have strong knowledge to protect him. One of them were to say, and if they said, if Allah eternally knew and willed for the slave to do the deed, so that's what we say. So we're saying, yeah, okay. He eternally knew and He willed for the slave to do the deed. So he says, okay, according to you, if He eternally knew and willed for the slave to do the deed, and He created the slave and the deed, that's what you say. So we're going to say, yeah, that's right. He created the slave and He created the deed. So he's going to say, it's okay. Okay, so according to you, He created the slave and He created the deed, and He eternally knew and willed for the slave to do the deed. So according to you, the slave's deed is subject to destiny? So we're going to say, yeah, that's right. So he's going to say, so doesn't that mean there's no way that he can escape the will of Allah? So we're going to say, yeah, that's right. So he's going to say, then he's forced then. Can't get out of whatever Allah willed, so he must be forced. So if he blasphemed, then he was compelled to blaspheme. And if he didn't believe, then he was prevented from that belief. by a will that's most decisive and irrevocable, the will of God that is irresistible, undefeatable. How would the deed then, when the slave does the deed that, according to you, God created his body and God created his actions? So then, when this slave does an action, any action, how could you even say it's his deed? Look at his heartbeat. We don't say that the heartbeat is the deeds, is the slave's deed. That Mu'tazili would say, we both agree. You Sunni, so-called Sunni, you agree with me that the heartbeat is not your deed because you have no control over it. I agree with you. The heartbeat is not my deed. I have no control over it. So he's saying, according to you, you so-called Sunni, if God created the body and the actions, then how would then first of all, can the slave escape doing it? So Sunni's going to say, no, he can't escape. So he's going to say, then how would he even be attributed with it? Then everything he does is going to be like his heartbeat. So then if he doesn't have strong knowledge, you'd be like, so we have the answer here. We say, these are two questions. We say these are two questions. The answer to the first is yes, the slave is subject to destiny in his doings, but this does not negate the slave's power and choice. That was among what was destined. So there's no contradiction. Yani, we're saying, yes, his actions are subject to destiny, but what we're saying is his choice itself is part of what's destined. He's destined to have a choice. So he's not forced. If he has a choice, he's not forced by definition. Hence, whatever he selected would be attributed to him because he has a choice. He has a choice that's destined for him is going to come to some time in his life, which is a fork in the road, physically or figuratively. Yani, fork in the road means a decision. He's going to go left or going to go right. He's going to go to the lesson or not go to the lesson. He's going to wear red or he's going to wear blue. Has a choice. So this choice that he makes, it is itself part of destiny. So he's not forced. Is that clear? The answer to the second is no, our saying does not imply coercion because we say that Allah willed for the slave to choose. One decides to do the deed or not, so he's not forced. He selects an option. Whoever acts by will and selects and chooses is not forced by definition. One is forced when he has no selection. Then you're forced. You don't have any other option, so you're forced. The truth is that the voluntary deeds are done by the slave's will. So he might here try to go back. Say, yeah, he has no other option, right? So does he have an option about what's going to happen in destiny? No, he doesn't have an option about what's going to happen in destiny. So then he's going to say, then means he's forced. So we say, no, it doesn't mean he's forced because he doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen. So it means he chooses because he doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't have any control over destiny. No, he doesn't. But he doesn't know what's going to happen. So he goes by what appears for him, which is that now here I am. I have a decision to make. What's going to happen if I make this decision? I don't know. I could maybe estimate. Or if I make this decision, what will happen? I don't know. I could guess. So he has no control over the destiny. But he does still have a choice. Whichever way he chose, that was his destiny. So he's not forced. The truth is that the voluntary deeds are done by the slave's will. Anyone creating by will and choice must know what he creates. God said, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ. Does who created not know? Now this statement here can't be diluted by this statement. Anyone creating by will and choice must know what he creates. So someone might say, but that's only for Allah. Yeah, that's right. So why it says anyone? Because now we're talking hypothetically. We are supposing. If that anyone in reality is only one, then so be it. Since all of us know for sure that we are not knowledgeable about our voluntary deeds, this shows and proves that we are not their creators. For example, one does not know the details of his footsteps and vocal cords. That means how many footsteps, for example, did it take you to get from your car to the door? You don't know. Then you didn't create them because the one who creates knows. And when you talk, how are your vocal cords? How does that operate? You don't know. Then you didn't create anything. أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ. Does who created not know? Indeed, he does. Everything that Allah knew would happen, Allah willed for it to happen. This is a base of belief. And among the clearest proofs to defeat the Mu'tazila. Because if a Mu'tazili admits that Allah eternally knew everything that would happen, he would discredit himself. Imam Ash-Shafi'i said, if he admits to the knowledge, he is defeated, the Mu'tazili. Abu Hanifa also stated this, but in more detail. He said that our debate with the Mu'tazila is in two steps. One, we asked them, did Allah eternally know what the slave would do before he does it? If he says no, he committed clear blasphemy. If he says yes, then we go to the next step. We ask, did Allah will something contrary to what he knew? If he says yes, then he attributed ignorance to Allah. He is saying that Allah is willfully ignorant and thus commits blasphemy. And if he says no, then he agrees with us. So what's simple scenario of him agreeing with us? We say to him, did Allah know what the slave would do before he does it? So let's say he says, yeah, he knew. So then you say to him, did he will for something different from what he knew? So he says, no. So okay, then you agree with us. This is why the strong scholars did not hesitate to call the Mu'tazila blasphemers. Know that the people of knowledge said that the controlled one is of two types, forced and choosing. This goes back to what I was saying to you. Allah has two types of creations. A creation that has a will and a creation that doesn't have a will. Both of those are under his control. The one that doesn't have a will is under his control, and the one that has a will is still under his control. This is what the Mu'tazila couldn't understand. They thought, how could it have a will and be under God's control? In order to have a will, it must be out of God's control. So that's the deficiency of their minds. Know that the people of knowledge said that the controlled one is of two types, forced and choosing. The forced is like a knife or a pen in someone's hand. Yeah, he doesn't have a will. The choosing is like the writer with the pen in hand, with a pen in hand. Okay, so that's a base there. We established that. Two types of creations, choosing one and a forced one. Furthermore, something would only be controlled if it were functional. If a knife were dull, not sharp, it would not be controlled for cutting. And likewise, a pen, if it were not sharpened, it would not be controlled for writing. Now, this statement here, if the pen were not sharpened, it would not be controlled for writing. There's a type of person who would say, but what if it had not a sharp point, but still had a dull point and you could write with it? So that's a person who's, some people, they're thinking too stiff. They need to loosen their mind. Yani, when a person thinks too stiff like that, then it's difficult for him to understand generalities. If you cannot understand generalities, then you're not going to understand a lot of things. So, like a pen, if it were not sharpened, it would not be controlled for writing. Even if you had a dull pen, you would like to sharpen it so it writes better. So that gives you indication. An animal is controlled by its rider only if it's functional, including having choice and power. The dead or crippled horse is not controlled by a rider. Likewise, the accountable one would only be controlled if he functions. In this case, his functionality is the ability to select a voluntary deed through his own power and choice so that he can be judged for it. That's how we function. That's how Allah created us to function. And we are under his control. He created us, and this is how he made us functional. This doesn't take us out of his control. Our functionality is the ability to select a voluntary deed with our own power and choice so that we would be judged for it. In this case, one's power would be blended with weakness, and his choice would be fused with compulsion. That's what I was telling you also. There is an amount of compulsion. Imam Ibn al-Khatib, may Allah have mercy upon him, was truthful when he said, the human, concerning his deeds, is compelled to be in the form of one who has a choice. He is compelled to be in the form of one who has a choice. That is the extent of what human comprehension can reach. It's a very important statement. The human is compelled to be in the form of a chooser. Jahm ibn Safwan said, he's deviant, saying anyone other than Allah did anything is a figure of speech. Like saying the wall fell and the water ran. Like he's saying, if you say the boy ran, that's like saying the water ran. Saying that anyone other than Allah did anything is a figure of speech, he claims. We answered, this is against what the same people find within themselves. For all who look into themselves tell the difference between voluntary and involuntary deeds, the breathing, the blinking, and other things. All of us can tell the difference between the voluntary and involuntary deed, or voluntary deed and involuntary move. I don't want to call what's involuntary a deed. All who look into themselves tell the difference between voluntary deeds and involuntary moves. The movement that Allah creates in the slave is of two types. The motion that Allah creates in the slave without any relation to the slave's will or power. This movement would be merely an attribute of the slave and not a deed, like shivering, blinking, breathing, and heartbeat. Movement that happens to the slave without any relation to the slave's power. And the second one is the motion associated with the slave's power and choice. It's still a creation of Allah. It's a creation that Allah made associated with the slave's power and choice. This is not merely an attribute of the slave, but a deed of his voluntary action. Whoever denied the difference between these would not be among the intelligent people and is denying accountability. Yes, that's not an insult. That's true. He wouldn't be intelligent. If someone does like that, thinks like that, it's not intelligent. Thus, there are three factions involved in this case, like I told you. The first looked at the eternal will and power only, claiming that the slave has no doing in reality. Those are the ones who believe in compulsion. The second looked only at the created will and power, saying that the deeds are creations of whoever did them. Those are the deniers of destiny, and they say they make their own destinies. As Zarkashi said, Ahlul Sunnah took the middle, and thus their school is between Al-Jabr and Al-Qadar. So Al-Jabr means compulsion. Al-Qadar, here it means the school of the destiny deniers. Here, al-qadar means denial of destiny. So we believe in the qadar, but that doesn't make us qadariya. The qadariya are the people who deny destiny. So the scholars say he talks about qadar. He means he's a destiny denier. That's what's meant here. So Az-Zarkashi said Ahlul Sunnah took the middle, and thus their school is between Jabr and Qadar. They said that the issue is a mixture. There is no escape from considering both. Therefore, it is choice fused with compulsion. And they express that with the term kasb, acquisition. The acquisition of the slave. It's a choice mixed with a compulsion. That fusion, that choice mixed with compulsion, is in God's saying, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. You did not throw, i.e., you did not create the throwing when you threw, O Muhammad. Meaning, when you acquired the act of throwing, rather, Allah threw. Meaning, He created the act and the acquisition. He didn't acquire it, though. He created your acquisition, O Muhammad. In this verse, Allah confirmed the Prophet's throwing and negated it. In this verse, Allah confirmed his throwing and negated it. وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ. You did not throw when you threw. Thus, if the act is by the eternal qudra, the eternal power, it is called khalq, creating. And then the qadir, the powerful one, is called khaliq, creator. But if the act is by the created qudra, then it's called kasb, acquisition. And the qadir, the powerful one in this case, is called kasib, acquirer or earner. The confirmation of acquisition is indubitable because what cannot be merged are coercion and accountability. That's what can't be merged. We can merge choice and coercion to a degree because the human being was created to choose. And he's saying he's created means he couldn't even stop himself from coming into existence. So he was made to exist. That is in itself a coercion. But he was created as a choosing being. So those can be mixed. It's possible to mix. But what can't be mixed is coercion and accountability. Coercion and accountability. Are we accountable for being created? No. That part's out of our uh, accountability. The Shaykh said in the Sirat, what is special about the voluntary deeds, meaning the deeds to which we have an inclination, is that they are the deeds related to acquisition. Therefore, accountability is related to those voluntary deeds, not to the involuntary. You don't acquire anything by a heartbeat or by blinking. You don't acquire anything by merely being created only. You didn't acquire a deed like that. Acquisition, which is the deed of the slave, for which he is either rewarded or punished in the hereafter, is for the slave to direct his intention and his will towards the deed, meaning he spends his power on that. Then Allah will create it for him at that moment. So the slave is an acquirer of his deed, and Allah is the creator of the deed of this slave, which is his acquisition. And this is among the most ambiguous matters in this science. Abu al-Mu'in al-Nasafi said that the Jabriya are a faction with no one left to debate for them. And there is no need to prepare to confront them because of how stupid they are. So their madhab was weak. They couldn't last. They couldn't survive the centuries through debate. The texts that prove that the slaves act, as well as those pertaining to the compensation of the afterlife, and those about the promise and threats of Allah, all prove the invalidity of their saying. All three of those, the fact that the slaves act and do, the compensation, and the promise, are mentioned in a single verse. جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Compensation for what they used to do. That confirms that they act, and that confirms that there's compensation, and that confirms the promise and threat. He also said, بما قدمت يداك وأن الله ليس بظلام للعبيد. For the deeds that you have prepared for yourself, and Allah is not unjust to the slaves. فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. Whoever does a particle's weight of good shall see it, and whoever does a particle's weight of evil shall see it. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not charge a soul except with what it is able. Hence, the slaves do not have a choice with the meaning intended by the Qadariyah, because they're going to say the slaves have a choice. And we say the slaves have a choice, but they mean something we don't mean. So the slaves don't have a choice with the meaning intended by the Qadariyah, who are the majority of the Mu'tazila, because the slaves do not create their own actions. That's what they mean. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdi.